The morning light was barely slipping through the blinds when I realized the room felt wrong. Too still, too staged, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My hands trembled before I even saw the stack of legal papers waiting for me on the table, the ink sharp against the cold surface. And in that heartbeat of silence, I understood something inside my life had shifted forever. If you've ever trusted someone who later tried to rewrite your world, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Stories like this happen more often than we admit. I stood there, feeling the weight of betrayal settle over my shoulders like a winter coat I never asked to wear, knowing I couldn't turn back from what was coming. Let me show you how it all began. I stood in the center of that living room, feeling the weight of two sets of eyes on me. Brittany's sharp with impatience, and the legal representatives steady, rehearsed, almost detached. They had positioned themselves as if I were already defeated, as if this moment were nothing more than a formality. I could feel the tension pressing against my chest, that familiar mix of disbelief and quiet outrage. After everything I had given this family, somehow I was the one being cornered, treated like I couldn't understand what was happening in my own home. But I wasn't confused. Not anymore. I could see the papers they brought, thick with assumptions, written as if my signature were a simple box to check. They didn't expect resistance. They certainly didn't expect preparation. Underneath my calm, I held the truth they didn't realize I already uncovered. Proof of what had been happening behind my back. Proof of how far Brittany had gone to control what was never hers. As they waited for me to break, I found myself remembering how this week began, how the tone shifted little by little until I was standing here, facing a woman who believed she could push me out of my own life. I took a breath, steady and full, knowing this moment wasn't the start of the story. It was the consequence. And to understand how we ended up in that living room at 2:30 p.m., I have to go back to the very beginning, back to the wedding weekend, when the first cracks started to show. I remember leaving that living room and letting my mind slip back to the wedding weekend, almost as if I needed to remind myself where the ground first shifted beneath my feet. 2 days before all of this, I was standing in a banquet hall filled with soft lights and laughter, watching my son promise his future to a woman I was trying my best to welcome. I had poured so much of myself into that moment, including the $15,000 I quietly used to help them cover the final expenses. It felt good at the time, knowing I could lift a little of their burden as they started their life together. I went into that weekend with a heart full of hope, wanting nothing more than to see Jason happy. But even before the ceremony began, I noticed the small things. The way Brittany introduced me to her relatives with this gentle hint that I needed looking after, as if I couldn't manage on my own. The way she steered conversations so subtly that I almost questioned whether I misheard her. Each moment was tiny, easy to brush off, and I did, because that is what mothers do when they want peace for their children. Still, there was a quiet ache settling inside me, a sense that I had been placed in a role I didn't recognize. I told myself it was nerves, that weddings bring out odd tensions, that I shouldn't read too much into anything. I kept smiling, kept helping, kept hoping. What I didn't know then was that those small slights were not random or passing. They were the earliest signs of something far more deliberate, something that would follow me home after the celebration ended and lead directly into the days that came next. I told myself that once the wedding excitement faded, everything would settle, and the odd moments would make more sense. But only a week later, I found myself packing a small suitcase and stepping into Jason and Brittany's house, believing their reassurance that it was safer for me to stay with them for a while. I wanted to trust that, to believe it came from care rather than control. At first, it felt comforting to be close to family, but that comfort didn't last long. Little by little, Brittany folded herself into every corner of my daily life. She began handling my medications, telling me it was easier if she organized them. She took my mail and placed it in a drawer I didn't have a key to. She started keeping my important papers for safekeeping, though I never asked her to. Even my simple routines, morning coffee, quiet walks, managing my own appointments, slowly shifted under her supervision. Each change was small enough to dismiss, but together they created a sense of being watched, managed, contained. I kept questioning my own instincts, wondering if I was overreacting or ungrateful. I reminded myself that they had opened their home to me. But beneath that reasoning, a quiet anxiety had begun to take hold. A sense that I was losing pieces of myself without realizing it. Looking back now, moving into their house was the moment the ground truly started to tilt. I didn't know it yet, but the next step would be far more direct and far more dangerous. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the kitchen that morning. The house felt too still, too prepared, as if the air itself had been waiting for me. Brittany was already seated, her posture stiff, and beside her sat a man I had never seen before. A neat stack of documents placed between them like a silent verdict. The sight of those papers sent a cold heaviness through my chest before I even understood what they were. As I stood there, they gestured toward the documents with an expectation that felt rehearsed. I could sense the pressure without a single word spoken. Everything in their arrangement told a story. Decisions already made, outcomes already assumed, and my signature treated as a mere formality in a plan that no one thought I was sharp enough to question. When I finally understood the nature of those papers, assisted living placement forms, deed transfer documents, statements implying I couldn't manage my own affairs, I felt a wave of humiliation that nearly took the air out of my lungs. But beneath that humiliation, something steadier rose. A quiet, stubborn instinct telling me to wait, to read, to think. I realized these decisions weren't sudden. They had roots stretching back months, hidden in all the little ways Brittany had inserted herself into my life. When I hesitated, I saw a flicker in Brittany's expression, a tightening, a frustration she failed to hide. It confirmed what my instincts were already screaming. None of this was for my sake. I told them I needed time. I walked away, still trembling, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Whatever they were planning, I would not walk into it blindly. I knew then that I needed to gather my own documents, my own proof, before they tried again. I went back to my room with my heart still pounding. But something inside me had shifted. Fear no longer swallowed me whole. Instead, I felt a steady, almost unfamiliar clarity. If they wanted to corner me, I needed to understand exactly what they thought I wouldn't notice. So I opened the small box where I kept the things that truly mattered. Documents I hadn't looked at in months, maybe years. I spread them out slowly, letting the truth rise piece by piece. The deed was still in my name. Seeing it reminded me that this house wasn't some fragile privilege Brittany granted me. It was mine. Then I found the canceled check for the $15,000 I loaned Jason during his hard stretch. I had forgotten I kept a copy, but holding it now made everything make sense. The pressure, the sudden urgency to move me out, the way she tried to paint me as incapable. And then, tucked behind an older folder, I found the conditional power of attorney document Jason and I signed years ago. The conditions were strict, and none of them applied to my current state. Brittany had counted on me forgetting that. With each discovery, the fear in me thinned. I called my physician and asked for written confirmation of my cognitive health. Then I contacted a detective I had once spoken to during a community event, explaining what had happened in the calmest voice I could manage. I could feel myself rebuilding piece by piece, the way a person does when they finally remember their own worth. By the time I closed the box, I knew the balance had shifted. Brittany thought she had the advantage, but she had no idea what I held now. And I had a feeling she wouldn't take that loss quietly. After gathering my documents and feeling that first flicker of strength return, I thought I might have a little time to breathe. But Brittany must have sensed the shift in me, because almost overnight her behavior changed. The sweet, patient tone she used around others hardened the moment we were alone. She began hovering again, but this time with a sharper edge, pointing out moments when I misplaced my keys, narrating them as signs that I was slipping, twisting harmless forgetfulness into something darker. I watched her take small incidents and inflate them into stories she could repeat later, practiced and polished. It felt as though she was rewriting my life in real time, building a version of me that fit her plans. And the worst part was how calm she seemed while doing it, as if she felt entitled to shape the truth around her own ambitions. The moment everything clicked into place was the morning she reached into my purse and pulled out a small bottle of prescription pills. They weren't even mine. They belonged to a neighbor who had asked me to hold them for a few hours while she waited for her grandson to pick them up. But the look on Brittany's face told me she had waited for this, had been searching for something she could use. She held that bottle like it was proof of a lie she had already rehearsed. A cold fear ran through me then, deeper than anything I had felt before. She wasn't just trying to push me out. She was willing to destroy my name, my independence, and my dignity to get what she wanted. In that moment, I understood the truth. This wasn't manipulation anymore. It was an attack. And if I didn't prepare for what was coming, I would lose everything. Section 7 would be my only chance to fight back. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I walked into the living room with my hands steady and my heartbeat calm in a way it hadn't been for weeks. The sun was coming through the blinds in thin, straight lines, almost like the room itself had been cut into pieces. Brittany sat rigid on the couch, and the legal representative beside her straightened when I entered, as if preparing for the same performance they attempted before. But this time, I wasn't the frightened woman they expected. I placed my folder on the table and opened it slowly, letting each document speak for itself. The original deed, the canceled check showing the $15,000 Jason still owed me, my physician's written statement confirming my cognitive clarity, then the notes I had kept about Brittany's behavior. Small things at first, but unmistakable when laid out together. I watched the legal representative's expression shift from polite detachment to something closer to alarm. I could almost feel the moment they realized this situation might involve elder abuse, and that they had walked right into the middle of it. Brittany tried to hold her composure, but I saw the panic simmer beneath her forced stillness. Her confidence, once so sharp, began to crack around the edges. Every piece of evidence I placed down widened that fracture, and for the first time, she looked at me not as someone she could control, but as someone she had underestimated. I felt no need to raise my voice or defend myself. The truth sat plainly between us. I simply told them I would not sign anything. I didn't need to say more. The room had shifted. The power was mine again. As I gathered my papers and turned away, I felt the weight of what would come next. Michael's reckoning. The fracture in our family that could no longer be ignored. And I knew the next part of this story would be even harder to face. After the showdown ended, the house fell into a heavy, unnatural quiet. It was as if every wall had absorbed the truth and was now waiting to see what we would do with it. I was gathering my papers when I heard Michael's footsteps behind me. Slow, uneven, the way someone walks when their world has cracked in a place they didn't expect. When I turned, I saw the confusion and shame written all over him. He looked like a man suddenly waking from a long sleep. He tried to speak, but the words tangled before fully forming. I could see the weight pressing down on him, realizing what Brittany had been doing, realizing how willingly he had stepped aside while she chipped away at my dignity. Seeing him like that hurt more than the ambush itself. There is a particular heartbreak that comes when your own child becomes a stranger to you, not out of malice, but out of weakness they never learned to confront. As he stood there, fragile and unraveling, I felt the old patterns rise, my instinct to comfort him, to excuse him, to carry his guilt so he wouldn't have to. But I couldn't follow that path anymore. I thought about all the years I had filled in the gaps, smoothed over the disappointments, absorbed the wounds so he could avoid responsibility. And I realized how deeply that habit had shaped both of us. I told myself the truth I couldn't say aloud. Love does not mean allowing someone to break you, even your own child. The fracture between us revealed itself clearly in that moment, not as a sudden break, but as something long forming. I felt sadness, yes, but also clarity. I needed space. I needed safety. I needed to reclaim the parts of myself I had handed over too easily. By the time I finished packing a small bag, the decision was made. I would move out. I would begin again. And I had no idea that the next person to knock on my door would change everything. Brittany's mother, carrying truths I never expected to hear. When I moved into the small apartment, I thought the quiet would finally give me room to breathe. For the first time in months, I woke without feeling watched. I made coffee, unpacked a few boxes, and tried to settle into the unfamiliar stillness. I told myself this was the beginning of something new, even if it felt lonely. I truly believed the chapter with Brittany was behind me. Then, late in the afternoon, there was a knock at my door, a soft, hesitant sound. When I opened it, I saw a woman who looked like she had aged 10 years in one afternoon. It took me a moment to recognize her. Brittany's mother. My first instinct was to brace myself, expecting another confrontation, another attempt to twist the truth. But the expression on her face stopped me. It wasn't anger. It was sorrow. She stepped inside only after I nodded. As she stood there, she began sharing the kind of truth no mother wants to admit. Brittany had been manipulating older people for years. She spoke of patterns I recognized instantly: control, isolation, financial pressure, emotional distortion. Each revelation settled over me like new weight, yet somehow also lifted an old one. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone finally saw the truth. Then she reached into her purse and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was the $15,000 I had loaned. She told me she couldn't fix everything her daughter had done, but she could make this right. I felt a rush of emotions: shock, relief, gratitude. and a quiet grief for a family so damaged it had spilled into mine. As she left, I sat with the envelope in my hands, feeling the first steady breath I had taken in weeks. This wasn't the end. There would be legal consequences now, and I knew the next steps were already moving toward me. When the detective called, I was sitting at my small kitchen table, letting the late morning light spill across the floor. His voice was steady as he told me Brittany had been arrested earlier that day. For a moment, I just listened to the silence that followed. I felt the shock rise first, sharp and unreal, and then a long, slow breath of relief washed through me. Justice was finally moving, not in a dramatic sweep, but in the quiet, deliberate way real accountability often begins. Over the next few days, more details surfaced. The charges were serious, and the evidence went far beyond what had happened to me. Hearing that was painful in a different way, because it meant others had been hurt before I ever stepped into that house. Michael struggled with it all. I could see the conflict in him each time he reached out, the way he tried to piece together the truth he had ignored for too long. I carried compassion for him, but I also knew I could no longer carry his guilt. My new apartment became a kind of refuge. It was small, but it was mine. I found comfort in the simple routines of my days, watering a plant on the windowsill, taking slow walks in the early evening, cooking meals just for myself. The quiet no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like recovery. I reclaimed something in those weeks that I thought I had lost forever. My dignity, my steadiness, my sense of self. Even my relationship with Michael shifted into something more honest, though more distant than before. I accepted that healing doesn't always restore what was broken. Sometimes it simply gives you room to move forward. And as I stepped into that new life, I felt the first real certainty that I was ready to reflect on everything that had brought me here. Looking back on everything, I can finally feel the full weight of what I walked through and the strength it took to come out the other side. There were days when the betrayal felt too heavy to name, and nights when I wondered how I had missed the signs sitting right in front of me. But somewhere in that darkness, I found a deeper understanding of myself. I learned that boundaries are not walls. They are acts of love toward the parts of us that have been overlooked for too long. What happened with Brittany reshaped the way I see trust, family, and my own worth. It taught me that even when someone tries to take your voice, you can still reclaim it, piece by piece, until it feels like yours again. And it reminded me that healing does not erase what happened. It simply makes room for peace to grow in its place. Thank you for listening to my story. Sharing it has given me a sense of closure I did not expect. If any part of this touched your own life or made you reflect on your boundaries, I hope you will share your thoughts. Your voice deserves to be heard too.